So I just want to start off with like maybe a familiar theme for the epistemologists in the room, and that's Descartes. Okay, so the first section is Descartes gets political. So I want you to imagine yourself in Descartes' scenario, but this time, rather than sifting through everything you believe and lots of your ordinary beliefs and say like even some general beliefs like that you have a body, I want you now to consider your social political beliefs and your current event beliefs. So just consider those for a moment. You'll probably find yourself believing things like Biden's presidential election was the result of a democratic selection. You might also find yourself believing, especially if you're from the US, that generally speaking, school teachers are accurately informing, or at least aiming to accurately inform students about, say, reproductive health and sex ed classes, and sort of exposing them to important ideas about gender identity. Okay. So those are certain things I believe, and I think probably many people in this room and many people elsewhere also believe. But now consider the following alternatives, which seem to press on these beliefs. One, well, maybe the Illuminati is actually responsible for Biden's election. So perhaps Biden was just handpicked by the Illuminati, and it wasn't really the result of a democratic process at all. Or perhaps when we're thinking about the school teachers, maybe it's the New World Order that is responsible for that. So maybe the teachers are actually doing the bidding of the New World Order, and they're not really sort of like acting in the students' best interest, but they're really trying to satisfy the whims of the New World Order and start up these pedophile sex rings and groom the children. Okay, so if you're familiar with Descartes, and familiar, I think, with sort of contemporary or traditional epistemology, you'll see there's a bit of a tension here. If you believe one thing and you recognize that there's something else, some hypothesis, for example, that is incompatible with it, and it seems like you need to be able to rule out that hypothesis if you can rationally or justifiably maintain your antecedent belief. So, for example, I believe that if I'm in Amsterdam right now, and I recognize that, well, if I'm in Amsterdam, I'm not in Utrecht. So I'm justified in believing that I'm in Amsterdam. It seems to follow that I'm justified, or in a pretty easy position to become justified in believing that I'm not in Utrecht. Likewise, if I'm justified in believing that Joe Biden was democratically elected, well, I also recognize that that seems to entail that thereby the Illuminati did not undemocratically select him or just plant him to become the new US president. So seems like then, just by easy, competent deduction, I can just deduce that the Illuminati conspiracy theory or hypothesis or explanation is false. Okay, so now section 2. I actually think this is pretty puzzling, and hopefully it struck all of you as puzzling. So first part of the puzzle, what I'll call social epistemic skepticism. So one way of responding to this line of thought is to say, well, actually it goes the other way around. One person's modus ponens is really another's modus tollens. So I can work backwards. Since I'm not justified in so easily rejecting or dismissing that conspiracy theory, that means I need to actually let go of my antecedent social, political, and current event beliefs. I'm really not justified in holding those things after all. And so you can just kind of go down the list. That seems like a pretty bad thing. That's one option. Another option is just to reject this principle about rationality or epistemic justification. Maybe it's not the case that just because I'm justified in believing one thing, A, and I'm justified in believing that A entails B, then I'm thereby in a position to justifiably believe that B, or to justifiably draw out that inference. So maybe epistemic rationality is like really local. It just doesn't extend to everything that I know that you know to be logically entailed by what you know. Or a third possibility, maybe we can get easy anti-conspiracy theory knowledge. Maybe in a kind of Morgan way, we can just deduce from lots of the stuff we justifiably believe that, well then, these conspiracy theories have just got to be wrong. So that's the trilemma, I guess. That's the puzzle. Each of those seems sort of strange, right? It seems like there's a cost that comes with accepting any of those, and yet it seems like we have to accept one of them. Okay, so now section 3, a preview. I accept number 2. So number 2 says locality of epistemic rationality. I think that, well, just because I am justified in believing this stuff about Biden, I'm justified in believing what I do about school teachers in the US, and I also am justified in believing justified in believing that it has certain logical consequences. It doesn't mean that I'm thereby justified in drawing those logical consequences, as strange as that might sound. So I'm going to try to motivate that picture. And to do that, I'm going to develop, well, sketch a social relevant alternatives theory. It comes from ultimately J.L. Austin, who developed a relevant or kind of proto-relevant alternatives theory. And the idea is that, well, when we recognize something is incompatible with what we believe, rationality doesn't demand that we eliminate it. It only demands that we eliminate it if it really is relevant. So not every logically possible scenario incompatible with what we believe is really relevant. So there's this big question then, what determines relevance? Like what kind of gets through the filter, right? So that's a big question, and I'm going to try to give you a sketch of an answer to that question here. And my basic argument is sort of a dilemmic. So the first horn, I guess, it's sort of was already present actually in Brian Keeley's wonderful presentation, and also David, your presentation as well. So the first horn is something like this. If we treat these hypotheses non-epistemically, well, then there's kind of an easy way to show that they're not relevant, because they're just not, they don't have epistemic ambitions. They're not aiming to explain. They're not aiming to carve nature at its joints. They're not aiming to produce understanding in the recipients, et cetera, et cetera. They don't have epistemic aims at all. They really have some kind of pragmatic or prudential aims. And because they're not really theories, they're not really hypotheses, they're not really explanations, it's not incumbent upon us to treat them as such. So for that reason, we may, in a certain sense, ignore them. At least ignore them with respect to what ought I to believe about the social world around me. That's the first horn. The second horn is that, well, insofar as we do treat them epistemically as explanations, hypotheses, or statements that are sort of aiming at truth or aiming at some kind of epistemic goal, we may also ignore them. How? Well, again, because they're just not relevant to what we ought to believe about the social world, and that's where the social relevant alternatives theory that I'm going to develop comes into play. Okay, so I'm going to focus on the first horn real quick, but since maybe some others also kind of thought a little bit about this in their talks, since we've already covered a lot of it, I'm just going to fly crazily over this and to get to the maybe even more controversial horn of my argument. Okay, but I want to say a few things about it first. So I think a really interesting question for conspiracy theory theorists is just to kind of step back and think about like, what's the point of conspiracy theorizing, or like, what's the point? So that's more of like on the kind of consumer end. What's the point of conspiracy theorizing? But we can also think about like on the broadcaster end. So like, what's the point of like propagating the conspiracy theories? So like, what's their function? Like, what's their social function? What are they there to do? Are they really there to, so with a case like Alex Jones, are they really there to explain? Are they really there to kind of get at the underlying like social structure and kind of see what the interesting features of it are? Are they there to produce knowledge, get us through belief? Or is it really something pragmatic? So the epistemic view says, yeah, that's why they're there. There to explain. I think that's pretty much like the orthodoxy or like the basic assumption in conspiracy theory literature so far. But recently, there's been a few people entertaining this non-epistemic picture on which, well, actually, the aim of conspiracy theorizing and conspiracy theory belief, in quotations, is really to secure prudential benefits, of which they can be many and varied. So things like to secure followers, prevent policy change, facilitate financial benefits, like in the case of Alex Jones, signal in-group loyalty, etc. Okay, so what I want to say here that is maybe new is that unlike some of the people, very small literature about this, they seem to say that we should think about the non-epistemic or pragmatic aims of conspiracy theorizing or conspiracy theories in quotes. We should kind of like reduce it to one kind of pragmatic aim. So like in the case of Kassam, it'll be something like promoting political or more broadly ideological propaganda, right? In the case of, maybe I'm going to pronounce their name incorrectly, Inchino, it'll be something like expressive signaling, right? You just want to like express that you kind of belong to a group. David's case, I believe it's sort of like participating in a kind of make-believe or in a kind of game, something like that. So what I think is actually going on here is something like, well, different conspiracy theorists and different conspiracy theories just have different pragmatic aims, right? So some are actually aiming at, okay, some are really aiming at political propaganda, and some are really aiming at, you know, make-believe and so on. So we really shouldn't reduce it to one thing, but we just be open to a kind of diversity of different pragmatic aims. Okay, so now going epistemic. Real quick, this is where I'm going to have to end, unfortunately. It's kind of like a 30-minute talk packed into 5 minutes. I think that, you know, some of us in the room, like particularists, are going to want to say, well, don't we just have like really good evidence against these, like Groomer conspiracy theory, Great Replacement, Illuminati, etc. And I want to say, like, well, in one sense, yes, but in another sense, no. And the important sense in which it's no is that any of the evidence that we appeal to is going to be pretty controversial. Namely, it's going to strike the proponents of it as epistemically circular. So it'd be like if I appealed to the 9/11 Commission report as evidence against the Illuminati conspiracy theory about 9/11. I mean, it is evidence, right, in one sense, but in another sense, it's not the 9/11 Commission report. It's not itself evidence that it's not misleading, or that it's not itself evidence that it wasn't produced by the Illuminati, right? So it's not kind of like evidence about itself. I need to do something extra. But then where do I go? Where do I get it? So I'm kind of suspicious about going an evidential route. I think we have to go a non-evidential route. This is where I'm going to end on the social relevant alternatives theory. So we have to think about our social practices and our expectations of others. So when you go to the doctor, you have this legitimate expectation that, you know, if you have pneumonia, they'll know the treatment code, right? If they didn't, you could rightfully blame them. If you went there with like this kind of strange endocrine disease, you expected them to know, your GP to know about that, that would be an illegitimate expectation. You can expect that of a specialist. I think that's what's going on with actual conspiracy theorists. They sort of expect us to know or be able to know that their theories are false without appealing to the normal resources that we have collectively. So, for example, in the case of the, you know, LGBTQ, the groomer conspiracy theory, it'd be like asking someone who's trans, like, oh yeah, well, you can't appeal to your own experiences as a trans person. You have to like bracket that and find some independent evidence to refute the theory. I think that that's just like not an achievable thing to do. Or put another way, it's too demanding of an expectation, just like my too demanding expectation of the GP. So that's the idea. That's where the expectations kind of flow from. I have to end there. Looking forward to all your questions. Thank you.